George Soros is a thug who's deployed as an economic hitman for the British Empire. He was trained at the London School of Economics and later picked up by an associate of the Rothschilds. He will then use the funds handed to him to launch financial warfare, stealing billions of dollars, and then, using some of these proceeds, finance programs such as drug legalization, euthanasia, and political cults such as MoveOn.org to destroy a nation's ability to resist imperial rule. But of course, Soros' demented thinking should not solely be attributed to himself, but rather, it was partially generated by his handlers during his formative adolescent years.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors. You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead. And one should understand and anticipate events. And when one is threatened, it was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes, yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
Yes, that's right, yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt?
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I could be there. None of that?
Well, of course I could be on the other side, or I could be the one for whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, in a funny way, it's just like the markets. That if I weren't there, of course, I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. And it was whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator. The property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property, so I had no sense of guilt.
After being psychologically prepared through his collaboration with the Nazis, George Soros naturally traveled to England in 1947 to seek further training at the London School of Economics. There he became the protege of radical positivist Karl Popper, who influenced Soros' latter project, the Open Society Institute, which coincided with Popper's imperial view that empires have the absolute right to launch wars against the so-called uncivilized Third World to establish peace, just as the British East India Company established peace by enforcing their opium trade on China with gunboats.
Now we have a global capitalist system. The power of the states is greatly reduced, which incidentally I applaud. But nevertheless, there isn't an international political process to keep pace with the internationalization of our economy.
Left alone, states do not maintain peace. We need an international organization aimed at keeping peace. In the 19th century, we had a global capitalist system, and it was Great Britain representing the imperial power that maintained stability. Currently, we have no system of peace. In some ways, the 19th century version of the global capitalist system was more stable than the current one. There were imperial powers, Britain foremost among them, that derived enough benefits from being at the center of the global capitalist system to justify dispatching gunboats to faraway places to preserve the peace or collect debts.
To no surprise, after his civilized training in London, Soros was soon to become the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy's most devoted monkey. according to former associates. George Soros was given his startup money to launch the offshore quantum fund NV by none other than Baron Edmund de Rothschild's right-hand man, George Karl Weiss. With funds of this type, Soros would conduct financial warfare through derivatives and currency speculation. His first major mission was plotted on June the 2nd, 1992, when representatives of Soros, along with other Anglo-Dutch financial predators, met on Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's yacht de Britannia, while in the presence of the Queen herself. The task was to rip apart Europe's financial structure to maintain stable exchange rates, then known as the European Rate Mechanism, and replace it with the Maastricht Treaty, which established the euro as the single European currency, hence putting full financial authority in the hands of one central bank controlled by the Anglo-Dutch financial establishment.
Now, this was part of a plot which was set up to create what we now see forming out of the Lisbon Treaty, this idea of a United States of Europe sort of thing, which is that basically you're doing away with national sovereignty. It's not like the United States in the way that we think of it, but it's the idea of doing away with national sovereignty, creating some sort of a European government. And we've seen now that we have the European currency, the euro. The European rate mechanism was the first step in this. So this was set up with a number of nations involved. The British were part of it to help get it set up, but the British didn't want to stay in it because they preferred to manipulate it from outside, because this is a trap for the rest of Europe, but to be manipulated by the Brits, but the Brits don't want to subject themselves to it. So Soros's role in all of this was as a front man for a move by the Bank of England and allied financial powers to pull the pound out of the European rate mechanism. Now, this is pretty funny because Soros, this operation got Soros known as the man who broke the pound, or the man who broke the Bank of England, when in fact he was just a front man and a stooge for the Bank of England in this whole process. It's easy to prove that George Soros did not break the Bank of England. And the proof of that is that George Soros is still alive. He's still being used as a British asset. If he had actually done what the myth says he did, they'd have killed him. You know, that's the way it works. You don't take on that power and get away with it. So the fact that Soros is walking around doing their bidding today proves that he never did. He was always an agent of theirs. He's always been a front man and a stooge for the British Empire.
The economy of the Soviet bloc itself is a terrible and worsening failure. In Western European culture, we have demonstrated that the successes of nations of big industries depends upon the technologically progressive independent farmer and what is called here in Germany the Mittelstand. Soviet culture in its present form is not capable of applying this lesson. Despite all attempts at structural reform, and despite any amount of credit supplied by the foolish West, the Soviet bloc economy as a whole has reached the critical point. At its present time, in its present form, it will continue to slide downhill from here on, even if the present worldwide food crisis had not come into being.
In the 1980s, anticipating the collapse of the Soviet bloc, Lyndon LaRouche proposed East-West cooperation to develop Eastern Europe and Eurasia. After the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, the LaRouche movement organized in leading circles of Europe around the Paris-Berlin-Vienna Productive Triangle program, and then the Eurasian land bridge for capital-intensive, energy-dense infrastructure and industrial buildup to provide better living standards along corridors of development reaching all across Eurasia. But within the British Empire, a handful of strategic planners saw this moment as an opening for the drastic turn toward their system of world empire. Just as the statesman Lyndon LaRouche was being forced into jail in the most disgraceful, fraudulent trial in American history, the same Anglo-Dutch forces that had moved to destroy LaRouche unleashed their golem, George Soros, upon Eurasia. As the Soviet Union declined, the economic hitmen moved in. Poland, with the registration of Soros Stefan Batory Foundation in 1988, was ground zero for the European test run of Harvard economist Jeffrey Sachs' shock therapy model. This program, a Shaktian monetary austerity, slave labor, and the wrecking of benefit and pension guarantees for state workers, would be used throughout the region to implement free market looting. George Soros was in the midst of the effort to cultivate a new leadership which would implement the radical free market model even before the Soviet Union cracked. In 1990, he financed foreign jurists and economists to prepare documentation in support of the Stalin Plan, also known as the 500 Days Plan for shifting the USSR to free market economics, shutting down the Soviet military-industrial economy, and imposing budgetary discipline. Academician Leonid Balkin and then Soviet Finance Minister Valentin Pavlov blocked full adoption of the Stalin Plan in 1990. But the next year, its foreign sponsors saw a new chance.
The free market gurus and think tanks that helped redraw the economic map of Britain during the 1980s are planning an ideological invasion of the Soviet Union in the belief that the failed coup has rendered the empire ripe for a dose of Thatcherism. Although their influence may have diminished at home, the Thatcherites believe that the events of the last few days have created the perfect new laboratory to test their ideas.
In 1991, when the Soviet Union came to an end, Ukraine declared its independence right after the shadowy attempted coup of August 1991, Boris Yeltsin, he became president of Russia. And through various political maneuvers, unfortunately, the backers of the authors of the Stalin Plan, the 500 Days Plan, the most radical schemes of deregulation, privatization, whooshed into the government of Russia in December 1991 as a group, and in January 1992 set out to implement the radical deregulation ideas.
Within 5 years of shock price decontrol, privatization of state industry, sell-off of military stockpiles, and opening the borders for smuggling of everything from raw materials, weapons, and drugs, Russia's economy collapsed. The labor force shifted from production to various forms of criminal activity. The living standard plunged, and the former Soviet region saw the fastest expansion of the drug trade and drug use in the world.
Think for a moment what happens in a nation where 70% of the industry is heavy industry, military-oriented, and the economy as a whole is monopolized. What happens if you take an economy like that and decontrol prices overnight?
In 2003, Soros greatly scaled back his efforts in Russia to focus on the United States.
You're not strong by putting other people down. You're strong by lifting other people up. That's our responsibility.
The disgusting impotence of the Democratic Party with the ongoing presidential election represents Soros' methods of popular subversion in the field of U.S. politics. It was MoveOn.org, an organization largely funded by Soros himself, that played a significant role in Obama's capture of the nomination, despite Hillary Clinton's clear command of the popular vote. MoveOn.org got its start by leading the charge to censure President Bill Clinton, as the fascist wing of the Democratic Party fed the media frenzy to destroy him over the Monica Lewinsky scandal in 1998. This was a setup, reacting to Bill Clinton's echo of Lyndon LaRouche's call for a new Bretton Woods in the face of an exploding financial crisis. Recognizing the ignorant qualities of MoveOn, Soros and his associates contributed over $6.2 million to the organization in 2003. By 2004, MoveOn was practically owned by George Soros. During that period, the MoveOn crowd heavily promoted a professional loser, Howard Dean, for president. In 2006, MoveOn waged a campaign against Dick Cheney's Halliburton, dropping Halliburton's stock to a meager $26 a share. While MoveOn railed, Soros gradually bought almost 2 million shares of the deflated stock, eventually comprising over 2% of his total portfolio and establishing Halliburton as Soros' biggest investment that year. Almost suddenly, MoveOn's crusade against Cheney's war fell silent. Halliburton's stock value gradually increased, and Soros made another killing, almost $40 million in profit off of the very grouping he pretended to despise. This is the character of that demented creature, George Soros, a creature who operates not of his own volition, but on orders which he receives from the British Empire. Their intention, knowing that their globalized free trade system has come to an end, is to prevent a Franklin Roosevelt-style presidency at all costs and to replace it with a system of world empire. Therefore, those associated with Soros and his MoveOn.org cult must come to recognize their foolishness and sever all ties to this amoral Nazi collaborator. Because if you succeed in falling into their trap, then into the fiery depths of hell will they take us all.
Move on.